Yo, 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 welcome back to the Furrii Your Lifestyle podcast, conversations on lifestyle, passions, and hustles. My name's Chris Furlong, I am your host, and once again, super thrilled to be here having this conversation with you and to continue on from last week's episode of how do I get to live my big dream. Now, this was a two-part series, and this is part two, having the conversation with Justin Nolan. And in the last episode, what we did, we touched on the first 4 steps of this process in order to help you live your big dream. And we touched on clarity, really. That's what the first 4 steps was all about. Building that clarity, helping you understand what it is you're about to take action on, that you want to pursue, that you want to move forward with. Now, if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I do encourage you, jump on back, go have a listen, because those are the steps that need to happen before the steps that you're about to hear. So I do encourage you, go jump on over there. Now, in today's episode, we are touching on the final steps from 5 to 9 of how to live your big dream. And that is the completion stage. So we touched on a few different things here. Once again, we're getting into a lot of conversation, into a lot of perspective, and into a lot which can come across as quite overwhelming. So if you need to, take the time, take some notes, stop, pause, and just digest it as you need to. But I do encourage you, as we go through this, remember to keep an open mind, and if you do have questions, you can come back to Justin, come back to myself at any point in time, and we're more than happy to help. So let's continue on. So we get into this next phase, which is, I guess you've called it completion, which is, I guess, somewhat, making it happen, executing and moving forward. And the first one that I see is step 5 being, you need to decide on a budget, costs over pay. So let's dabble into that. So what are we talking about here?
Yeah. And so one of the first things that I recognize when I look at that, it seems like it's very money driven. But what's cool is both budget and costs and pay can very be synonymous with other things like time, right?
Yep.
And so to me, when I look at something like step 5, we're discussing our budget for everything, really: time, energy, and money, resources, maybe if we added another category. But the point is, how much do you have at your fingertips in those 4
Yep.
areas to invest? And what do you expect to pay to kind of get out of that, right?
Yeah.
And so when we think of something like time first, 168 hours, we all are afforded that in the course of a week, 24 hours in a day,
Yep.
right? 365 days a year, on and on. But the point is, what do you want to sacrifice? Like, if you still want to be able to keep up with every new television show that Apple and Netflix and Amazon roll out, we're going to start having a very small amount of time to play with.
Yeah.
And so financially as well, right? If you have that 100 grand in the bank that you were keeping for retirement, but you're thinking, oh, maybe I would be willing to invest in this a little bit. Well, are you going to hire a coach? Are you going to hire a team to market the app that you're coming up with, to market your podcast? Are you going to hire a VA to do some video editing for your YouTube channel so that right from the get, you can play catch up a little bit quicker? There's all these options, but it comes down to that. And then the other part being, when I look through all these steps, again, I created this specific 9 steps and clarity and completion over a long period of time through reading lots of books, listening to lots of videos and podcasts. When I look at step 5, it reminds me a lot of Tim Ferriss's dreamlining exercise.
Yeah.
Which is like, we're clear now on kind of like 4 or 5 of the things we want, but what is it going to cost to get there?
Yeah.
And what do you need in terms of, like, how much are your groceries every month? How much is your rent or your mortgage? How much do you pay in gas given your current lifestyle? Okay, what is that number? And now, how do you match that number or maintain that number? And what number do you need for your new pursuit? And so it does get into money a little bit as well, but it comes down to this idea of, how do you want to spend your resources, I think is the best way to say it, in order to start chipping away. Because if you say I have 1 hour a week to work on this, that tells me very quickly, it's not that we can't make progress, but like, I don't want to sound judgmental by saying that. It's just important to clarify, what resources do we have? So I have $0 to invest and I have 1 hour a week. Okay, well, we're probably going to focus on, like, just making the best 30-minute YouTube video we can, plus editing time, because you're doing it yourself, and making an
Yeah.
episode card, putting the hashtags, and bang, bang, boom. But after 52 weeks, you still have 52 episodes. It's not
Yeah.
that bad, right?
Yeah.
You say I have 100 grand and 48 hours a week to invest. Well, that's going to
Yeah.
change the way we head into step 6.
Yeah. This is brilliant, right? I mean, people, this is really, really good, because a lot of the time, and look, there's a bit of right and wrong here, is because, you know, a lot of the time you need to go through the experience, you need to figure out what's working, what's not working. But this enables you, because a lot of the time, like for me, when I started out doing, you know, my running, or more so my flipping business, I guess, you know, I had some ideas in the back, but I've had to hit the ground running. I've taken in the skills, the strengths that I've got, and, you know, applied it as I go. But I haven't gone into it thinking, well, necessarily how much time. I've got unlimited time, because I'm, you know, taking a chance on me. I've ripped all that away. But whereas I think it's important, if you go through this little process, you can actually, in some sense, it will motivate you to pursue it, because you can say, well, this is the amount of time that I know I have for it. If it is 1 hour, and this is what I can do. And I think that's brilliant, because a lot of the time we get so focused on, like, oh, the outcome that you're looking for, which might be, you know, I want to have 1,000 subscribers, right? And they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to create a video, I'm going to do this, going to do that. And, you know, all of a sudden you spent 40 hours, you haven't done any of your other things, or you haven't looked after your family, you're getting dodgy in your job, and, you know, you're not actually getting the results you want. So all of a sudden you feel overwhelmed and like, this sucks. Whereas if you actually broke it down and said, okay, well, I don't have any money I can put aside, but I do have 2-3 hours that I can do a week to, you know, invest in. And, you know, you focus on, well, what's the first thing that you can do? And, you know, the great example is, you know, you can create a 30-minute video once a week, and, you know, with the content around that, or editing, you know, yeah, it's going to take 3 hours, but at the end of the year, you've got 52 episodes, which maybe you don't have 1,000 subscribers, but you're going to be a lot closer to getting to that goal than if you were trying to just throwing around, having no guide or anything, because a lot of that time you've probably wasted in, you know, trial and error, which in some sense gives you a lot of experience, and it will help you, you know, progress maybe a little quicker as you go through it. But I reckon if you did this is actually going to enable you to probably get ahead of a lot of other people that are, you know, still, you know, running around with like a headless chicken.
Yeah, and the other things that come to mind are, for one, you mentioned, like we talked a little bit about budget, and I often think about how, well, you were referencing how things evolve as you get into it, and through trial and error, you see different things. And one of the classic ones for this is, like, when I was in the fitness industry, or helping people more in the life coaching side of things, they're very much the same. But one thing that I would see a lot of times is, you first meet someone and they're like, well, I don't have any money to invest, but I just want to pick your brain. And again, I'm non-judgmental. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But I do know through experience now that that money is going somewhere, or they're doing something, and whatever, that's fine. It doesn't matter. I get it. It's not a sales thing, right? Like for myself, like I have enough empathy to understand what they're going through in terms of their own decision making. But like for me, I don't have a big high paying career. I'm not a super successful entrepreneur in terms of finances or monetization. Yet I've spent money on digital art that you know could hire a really good coach. So I know what the relative cases of money are too. And if you start looking at, again, this is why we talked about budget, right? If you start looking through your budget, you're going to find money in different things. And so that does evolve too, because especially when I've kept in touch with people, or they've said, well, can I just really still, like, you know, send you a voice note once a week? 6 months, a year, 2 years later, they almost always come up with the money, but their financial situation really hasn't changed. The only thing that changed was their mindset. Their willingness to be like, okay, I kind of realized that having support would be helpful, and this is now a more important investment for what I want to do, right? In terms of that budget piece. And the other thing is, I know you said that, like, you have almost endless time because you cut loose of that, but it still becomes prioritization, right?
Well, that's right.
Nothing worse than going 6 months and being like, shit, I shouldn't have done that. But you do learn.
Yeah. And I think that's why this is so important, because in some sense, it sets some level of a routine or a schedule or expectation, if anything. Because if you're going in it with like, well, I've got 6 months to blow, let's see what happens. And, you know, you're spending 80% of your time playing video games and 20% of trying to do something which you don't even know where it's going. Well, then, you know, you're probably going to be disappointed at the end of the year. Whereas if you realize, okay, well, I've only got 1 hour each week for 52 weeks, and I've got $100 that I can put it at each week. Well, then you can actually see the tangible outcome of what you've done. You might see that, okay, I've sunk $5,200 and I've got nothing in return, but hey, I've learned a lot. So you actually have got something in return. So I think it's an important piece to do. And I mean, you probably say that, well, just because that's your budget, whether it's time, dollars now, doesn't mean that in 6 months down the track, it's like, okay, I've got an extra hour now, or you've sped up, or you've been able to get rid of something else. You can double down. Now I've got 2 hours and I can put $200 in because you've gotten rid of an expense, or had some money come in, or whatever. So that doesn't mean you're set in, right? You adjust, you go with the flow, and as new things opens up, you can, okay, now I can put more time. And this actually comes very relevant in Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week as well. As things change, you adapt, you take a bit more, or you push a little further, or you see how far you can go with something. So I would encourage people to go check out the 4-hour work week if you haven't. But okay, so you've decided on the budget around costs, time, all that jazz, and we've gone into that in quite detail. I love this part. This is probably my favorite part so far. But then step 6, so you've got jotted down here, it's like details, so the audience, what's the problem, is there a solution? So what are we talking about here?
So to go business first, because probably the easiest one is you think of that classic like client avatar example, right?
Yeah.
Amazon, since the day they started the business, has always had that one client in mind. They've scaled to serve, half of the world, but they've always, through all their different product lines, chosen a target audience, a target avatar, a client that they're trying to reach if they chose their ideal one person.
Yeah.
Nickname, demographics, psychographics, characteristics, what have you. And then what problem is that person facing? What do they need, right? What are their needs, and how are you serving that person through the solution that you're providing? Now, the common misconception, similar to using the word budget and people only think money, is that when we think audience, problem, solution, we're often thinking, how do I monetize these people? But again, it may just be that you're always planning on being a musician, creating your music. It's essentially free because people are downloading it off from SoundCloud or Spotify or Apple Music, and that's it. Well, you are still creating for that audience, right? Or to go a little deep into the art world, you're tapping into the muse and you are trying to channel that energy into creating your art for the people, right? So it can be as esoteric and broad as I'm just trying to make great music and have fun with it. But you still really are creating for those people. If you were building, if one of the goals became to build an Instagram page, okay, well, who are you targeting? If you're a mom blogger who talks about cleaning, okay, well, now we have a target audience. What types of things do they want to see? And I think somebody who really, when it comes to this step, I learned a lot from is Pat Flynn. He wrote the book, How Will It Fly? He's done a lot of online courses and different things. He's got a good podcast, Smart Passive Income. He's really one of those people who has a solid strength in micro or macro, saying, okay, who's my target audience and how do I make sure that I'm asking them what their needs are so that I can serve them? Doesn't matter if it's a podcast, a book, or a course, or anything else. You're making a t-shirt. You're tapping into who are the people I'm serving, what am I providing to them, and what do they need?
Yeah, no, I love Pat Flynn, big fanboy. He's got amazing stuff. But no, you're exactly right. And I think going through this and understanding it, especially around, are you trying to monetize it? Are you just doing it because that's what you want to try and do? I think is very important because it helps set the expectation in yourself as well, right? Because a lot of the time we're thinking, oh, we're going to go out there and make this difference, or, I want to be earning this much. And then when you're not earning it, that's when you get deflated. And you think, what am I doing this for? This is pointless. When really, you've got so focused on the money and you've stepped away from the passion behind it. And, of course, we all, you'll be great to be able to have the money coming in, doing the things that you love because you never work another day in your life. But the reality of that is it's not happening overnight. And it might not even, if you go in with the intent of maybe not to make money, it kind of gets rid of that pressure, and the money might come eventually, it might not either. And I think not having to have that expectation just, makes that a little bit more to, I guess, digest. Whereas if, your intent is going, there's like, I want to be making $1,000 a week or a month or whatever, well, then that's great. You want to put that into it. And that's how you can kind of evaluate, have some KPIs and see how you're progressing. So I think that's super important. But yes, audience, problem, and solution. This is always quite hard, but you've given us a very high level view of that. And I think this part can get a little overwhelming because sometimes, and I think I want to get clarification from you, this is probably a good spot to be bouncing with other people, right? Because a lot of the time in our head, we think, oh yeah, my audience is this, this is what I'm solving, when that's just in our head. But when you actually play it back to someone else or a broader audience, they think, oh, well, actually, if I was in this show, this is what I would want. And you think, oh, and you kind of miss, where you're trying to go. So would you agree this would be kind of a spot where you want to be getting that, insight from, whether it's the 5 people you surround yourself or the people that's keeping you accountable? Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest, I won't say mistakes, because again, we're always learning and evolving, but one of the things that people will often do is they get feedback from the wrong people, right?
Yeah.
And it may not be bad people, just to clarify. They ask their brother if what he thinks about something that he has no interest in, right? But they ask them because that's just a person that they naturally think they could get feedback from. And this is especially true in like the idea of making clothing or art or something, right? You ask your wife, but she's not interested in like hoodies. It's like, so there's why ask there? As nice as it is, it's really irrelevant data going to, and that's why the audience part is first there, right? Is starting to recognize, well, who is this audience? And we haven't said that it scales to the individual much recently, so I can say it again. Whether it's a company or a person, it is about reflecting on that, because for some people it is going to be pretty cut and dry and straightforward who that audience is. If you're teaching power skating lessons, you're going to identify that hockey players and their parents are kind of your target audience pretty quick, or people who do skating, to put it bluntly. But if you are just like, I don't know, I want to make a YouTube channel, that's where you have to go back into those conversations. Have conversations with people online, surveys, all the classic ways of asking and getting feedback over the first days, months, and years of creating this YouTube business, to figure out, well, what does serve people. And I also feel that it's important to point out that doesn't necessarily, again, back to our ambitions. What's the ambition that we're mapping to? And that's what's going to be perfect heading into step 7, reverse engineering, is that whatever you're mapping to in terms of an ambition is the most important thing. If specific subscription growth of a newsletter or a YouTube channel or a podcast is the priority right now, then you're going to have to start looking at more like those key performance indicators, and at least adding an app like TubeBuddy or something that can help with analytics, and saying, okay, well, whenever I put out a video about jewelry, it just completely tanks. But when I do it on fitness, like it's like up 80%, and starting to ask those questions and then evolving your content to fit it, and looking at the evidence. But I'm a big fan of, and we said this right off the top, that we're doing all of this to live the good life, so to speak, right? To have mental health and to enjoy and have meaning and purpose. So for me, I know that success with my podcast or YouTube channel will always come second to the creative. And I used to, and people almost talked me into believing that was because I was scared of trying to make money or grow the business side of things. Now I have the wisdom to realize, no, that's not the case. I just want to create these things, and it's not ego driven, right? It's like it's that I know that this is what I want to create, and then within that it'll take longer, but it'll succeed. And for me, that's worthwhile.
Plus you're learning so much as well, because we kind of touched on it, you don't have this expectation to be rolling in the dollars, so that's gone, right? So as long as you're getting the content out, you're feeling good, you're learning, you're growing, you're experiencing it, you're learning skills, for the editing, or what works, what doesn't work. So if anything, you just create, it might be a bit more of a slow burn, but over time how you define that success of it. Was that actual, you dropping 52 videos, was that successful? Well, look, maybe you only got 1 view per video, but on the other side is you've come out, you've learned so much, you now know how to edit, the content that's working, potentially an audience, and now you can potentially direct it in a different way or double down or, execute better, because that would be the success from it. You've learned so much, right? And I think sometimes that fresh perspective of helping us understand, well, what are we actually trying to, I guess, achieve? Or if we reverse engineer success, because yes, success leaves clues, but one person's success isn't necessarily the success we're chasing either. So I think making sure we clarify that as well is very important, because, and it really does, it comes down to setting that expectation. What are you trying to achieve, or what are you identifying as success before you start chasing it? Because if we use Pat Flynn, for example, the guy's brilliant, entrepreneur. He's got so many different things happening, whether it's a product, he's got his courses, he's got his podcast, he's got his YouTube channels, and all these other things we probably don't even realize. Yet are we trying to say, I want to be Pat Flynn again? Or is it kind of like, oh, I just want to be able to do, a 10th of that, and then I'm successful, kind of thing. So I think that's super important. But I mean, yeah, success leaves clues. So reverse engineering, understanding what we want to be able to achieve is going to be key. But just before we jump on to the next thing, I just want to clarify here is, have you found that this part can be a little, I guess, overwhelming, or have people experienced that? Because I think unless you're really actually breaking down what that success is, sometimes you think, oh, I want all this, and you can kind of just get, I feel like it can get a little fluffy sometimes. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in terms of the overwhelming piece, I think every one of these steps can definitely be overwhelming to different people at different times. With the idea of audience, problem, solution, the reason why I named my handle Just Tries was because I wanted it to be a symbol of the fact that we don't know until we start taking steps and reevaluate, big or small. A lot of times you see in sports that people talk about, golf is a perfect example, because the golf athletes are just, spectacular and so much better than the number 2% to 98% in the world, right? Like they're, that top 1% is so separated from the rest of the world in that sport. Yet they all have a bunch of coaches. Fighting's a similar one in the UFC, right? The UFC fighters, the top ones in each division, are so separated from the rest of the world in terms of the ability to fight, yet they have like 10 coaches each. So the ability to say, I'm not an athlete, but I can coach. This is a perfect example for me of doing something like building a podcast, building a business, starting a YouTube channel, where sometimes you can coach better than you can be the practitioner, the player, the athlete.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And so this is a perfect example for me when we talk about this idea of clear-cut deciding on audience, problem, solution, reverse engineering that success, and saying, okay, well, what content should I create? Like if you want to build a business selling textbooks, we would be able to establish that and figure it out very, very quickly. Again, for me, myself, I'm not doing those things. I have content up there from my podcast. I have random stories of being a dad and hanging out. These different sort of elements for myself because I just want to create that way. But for somebody else, we would go super niche and we would target. But back to the original question about it being overwhelming, I think it certainly is, only if we're feeling like it's sort of an end game, right? I feel that a lot of people see people's success. Pat Flynn's probably a tremendous example because they don't see the other 20 courses that flopped.
That's right. That's true, right? And I think that's why I wanted to clarify, and I think it does come back to this whole expectation setting as well, right? What are you trying to achieve? And I had a friend that I've been running for, well, it must be about 6 years now, and I'm training for my first ultra marathon, and I've got someone saying, oh, I'm trying to do my first 5K, but I can't even run a full 5K, and I'm like, well, hang on. you cannot compare yourself to me. It's like, oh yeah, but you do it at this pace. And I'm like, yeah, but I've been doing this for 6 years, right? So your first run, if you walk, that's fine. Like, even if you do, double the pace that it took me, that's fine as well. Like, it's not about being perfect. The fact is, you got out and did 5K, right? It doesn't matter about the time. And I think that's kind of, and some of this pressure has come from society, and it's our own self, because we're always comparing, we're always on that constant scroll of seeing what these people are doing and that. But giving yourself a little bit of wriggle room and helping you understand, well, no, you're not going to be like Pat Flynn in a year's time. No, you probably won't be running your first ultra marathon in the first year of running. There's so much to learn, but some people might, they might be successful. And you touched on this before, that some people have taken a year to get to where they are, and they're the biggest hit in the world, where other people might take 10 years and then they're the biggest hit in the world. So helping you just have that, I guess, appreciation and being a little humble about it at the same time is, don't put that pressure on yourself, because it's not fair. Plus I think other people get frustrated by it, because here you are saying, I'm trying to hit, well, this is me, I can speak about this because I'm trying to hit a big goal with my reselling, and I'm nowhere near it, but I've actually done quite a lot, which is probably 10x than what other people have done, and they've been working harder than me. So I should not be complaining. And I think bringing that perspective into play goes further than just complaining about, oh, I'm not good enough, and you haven't even put a lot of time to it yet.
Right. And a really recent example of this stuff for me is that NFTs is a pretty big hot topic right now, right? And so it's something that I want to learn about. It ties well into learning about business. And I'll be honest, I'm very confident from the little bit of research that I've done that as a topic is going to be super commonplace in maybe 6 months from now, maybe 10 years from now. It doesn't matter, but it'll be like so deep rooted, commonplace knowledge that it's like us talking, maybe not about like water, but maybe like food. I don't know, but it's going to be very common, right? And right now, a lot of people don't know at all what it is. And so one thing I decided to do was I said, well, okay, I'm just going to create a project. So I'm going to launch a project for my birthday. I'm going to launch 24 pieces. Maybe I'll sell 0 of them. Maybe I'll sell all 24, maybe somewhere in between. But I don't care. All 3 of those options are already perfectly fine. And I'll hardly pay attention to the results at all. And I mentioned earlier that each one of these steps to me could be a book in and of themselves. I don't know how I'll structure this in terms of rolling out larger form content in the future, but likely the first time around will be one book and each will be a chapter. But this chapter is certainly about not keeping up with the Joneses or keeping up with the Kardashians. And that's what you're referencing, right? Is that
100%.
We need to make sure that we are focused on our own journeys. And the other thing that I would reference is like Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now. And this is where these things become so crucial and important. When you aren't focused on the past or the future, right? You'll notice we haven't talked about goal setting yet. We're going to, but we haven't talked about it yet. And that's because it's just, I think, so important for people, especially people who have struggled throughout their lives with trauma or attachment issues, and they really have never been able to dream big at all, to be taking these steps, is that they learn to really not focus on those past haters and people that put those voices in their head or situations, and to not worry about, is this going to work out, but just to finally have clarity and put the work in, because the work itself is enjoyable.
I see, we could dive into so much of this, but we're trying to not overwhelm people with all the information. But no, it's very true, right? And I think it really comes back down to that, the expectation setting, and not trying to go into this to be the best, but just be the best version of yourself, right? Because that's completely different. So we've got 2 more steps, step 8 and step 9. Now, step 8, it's probably one which I think some people would love this and some people would struggle with it, and it's systems, habits, and feedback, right? And I'm a routine junkie. I love this kind of thing. I love being able to have systems, but at the same time, if I'm not willing to adjust and reprioritize, then it can also be a weakness for me, because I like routine. I like the same thing. So I think there's some great conversation here. So step 8, systems, habits, feedback. What are we talking about here?
Well, just to quickly jump on that idea of not wanting to be too deep rooted in any one system, I feel it's really important to reevaluate. And for people will often ask, well, how often should I reevaluate? I personally have found that quarterly is reasonable, 4 times a year,
Okay.
to reevaluate those systems and habits. But what we're essentially talking about is the fact that, and this is so fun to learn, it's crucial really to learn, is that any of these people that we've talked about succeeding, whether it's hobby or passion, doesn't matter, because or hobby or job, it doesn't matter. Because let's say it's just hobby and you want to get good at painting. Well, you could go 15 years trying to get good at painting and you don't feel you're any better than you
Yep.
were 15 years ago, or writing, or doesn't matter, anything,
Yep.
singing, like just you could list everything, right?
Yep.
And so we know it wasn't the fact that you didn't have at least 20 minutes a week over the course of 15 hours to work on your passion. There was
Yep.
something else getting in the way.
Yeah.
And it's the same with business or academia. What we realize is that it's not the actual goals that mattered. Those are important, but
Yep.
what mattered was that the systems and the habits were so ingrained and routine. It was like brushing our teeth, and they mapped towards that goal. So they
Yeah.
were getting done on the regular with consistency. And that allows you, as James Altucher says, to skip the line,
Yeah.
right? When you have those systems and habits, all of a sudden you're going 7 days. And in those 7 days, you're making exponential progress.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Now it's I've struggled with, because like I said at the start, the routines has been really great. Systems I love, but sometimes it's kind of like you don't want to be ending up in that position. Well, sorry, you might be, it might not be. It's a bit of both, but it's like when you drive somewhere and you get to there and then all of a sudden you realize, wait, I don't even remember driving here. You've been driving for 30 minutes. So that can be a good thing and a bad thing, because depending on what's happening passively through that 30 minutes or hour or however that time is, it could mean that you're just brushing your teeth, you're just doing it routinely, but you're not actually getting into the crevices, you're not getting out all the gunk, the stuff that you need to be cleaning. Or maybe you are, and it's just on repeat and you don't have to worry about it. So I think there's that balance that you have to manage, which I guess plays really well with the habits as well, as building those habits, because sometimes it works both ways. You want to be building the right habits. You want to be making sure that, well, if you are going to be cleaning your teeth and it is going to be a 3-minute process, well, making sure you're ticking all the boxes in that 3-minute process, not just scratching and scrubbing for 3 minutes just for the sake of doing it, right? And because that's what builds a good habit and a bad habit, right? So then I think people can help, I think people can understand this, but then with feedback, right? So where do you start? And I know you touched on it, trying to do it quarterly or 4 times a year or whatnot, but how do you bring in the feedback? Is it a matter of, once again, reaching out to other people, or is it trying to, when you're building a system, when you're building a habit, of putting in KPIs or something that you can play back to?
Yeah, either or. I think qualitative and quantitative data both help, and just recognizing more as a concept that the first two, systems and habits, are really going to be the only way to map towards that ambition. I think I referenced Billie Eilish a couple of times when we brought up music. It's a perfect example. Like if she hadn't just started writing, if she hadn't, started singing and practiced singing, then the results are irrelevant. There's no awards, there's no album, there's nothing. So when you do that reverse engineering, well, what are those habits and systems that get us there? How do we practice, whatever? So, but as you said, the reason for feedback is if we just put our head down and do that, which is what we have to do for a period of time, or else we overwhelm ourselves with feedback, shiny thing on the side of the road syndrome, and all you bouncing around, like you said earlier, with a chicken with your head cut off, and you never have consistent gains to then get feedback from, right? You can't change one video on your YouTube channel and try and measure the data. You need some consistency. So in terms of how to get that feedback, I think it depends on your own personality type, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, or kind of a combination of the two. The other thing that can be fun to do, depending on what the ambition is and how crucial it is that we succeed in some sort of like data, is to say, and I know Sarah Dietschy, for example, she's a creator who likes to do this. What she'll do is she'll create 2 or 3 videos that are geared towards solving problems for her audience, right?
Yep.
That's it. She didn't come up with the ideas. She said, what do you guys want to learn? And she creates. But 1 every 4 videos, she creates just because she wants to. That's it.
Yep.
And then doesn't worry about the rest, really.
Yep. Yeah, no, that was actually something I was going to bring up, is because sometimes, and once it comes back to that expectation, what are you trying to do is, especially with vanity metrics, right? And YouTube's a great example, because I experience this all the time. I'll release one video, goes off, and I'm like, oh, I hated doing this video. Or then you release the video that you just want to do because you enjoy doing that one, but it doesn't get the views, right? And I think it's a bit of a double balance whammy, because you need to make sure that you understand your intents, but also give yourself some relief as well, right? If you just want to create a video and have some fun, well, then don't expect to have amazing metrics. You might get some really good metrics and then, wow, okay, cool, you can double down. But, going into it thinking you want to create something that no one wants to watch, you need to be happy with that. And you said it yourself, you're building a project, which, there's potential different outcomes, maybe 3 or more, and you're happy with either one. The idea is you just want to have some fun, experiments, see what happens, and play and learn and dabble in. And I think that's super important, is having that mindset mentality in place. Otherwise you'll be going into this, putting in so much work or investing in systems or habits. And then when you go through and get the result, you're not going to be happy with the result. And I think the feedback one, my recommendation people would be, having, whether it's accountability or making sure if you're going into something and saying, this is what I want to achieve, have someone else to understand that as well, because that way they can keep you honest to it. So when you start complaining about metrics that isn't relevant to what you're even trying to achieve, they can say, hang on, why are you focusing on this when you should be focusing on that? And I think, because once you get into it, you can change your personality, or you start earning some money and you're like, oh, I want more money, right? And I totally get that. And I think having that, bringing you back to earth or grounding you is super key. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you want to add anything more on that? Or
Well, all I would say is that I completely agree. And one of the thoughts that comes to mind is, if I'm the CMO for a new app startup or a new NFT project, and I'm hired to build out campaigns to grow the marketing for this company, then I'm going to be looking at those numbers and I'm going to say, okay, it's not good enough for us to get 24 views on a TikTok video. We're doing something wrong. How can we create more engaging hooks and build content that's going to bring that audience and get them more engaged and is going to go more viral, right? But if I'm creating for the sake of, I just want to put some cool content out there, I don't want to overthink it, and I would love to go really, really deep with those 2 subscribers that I'll have for the next 10 years, as opposed to trying to grow this brand out so it's a global brand, then those are just 2 completely different goals. And that's where, as we come out of this reverse engineering systems and habits piece, it's like, well, what is that ambition? And that's what your systems and habits should map to.
Which then uniquely just rolls straight into step 9, which is keep going and keep learning, right? And I guess you can have that as high level or as detailed as you want, because it's and for some people might think it's a bit of a cliche, but when something's starting to work is, you want to push forwards that, right? You want to give that momentum. And then when you start to get, not the progress that you're expecting or that you're trying to get, going back and saying, okay, so what do I need to adjust? Is this the right audience? Is it the right problem that I'm trying to solve? What was, have I missed something in one of the, researching the success or reverse engineering? I mean, that's how I look at this, but I want to hear it from you. So when it gets to step 9, keep going, keep learning. What's the intent here?
The way that I see this in large part is, any of these pursuits, again, hobby, job, or a combination of both, is like pushing a boulder up a hill. I've also seen the analogy that it's like you have this train that's like slowly inching its way up a hill, a roller coaster, and so that inching up a hill or pushing a boulder up a hill for some can happen chronologically very quickly. You look at TikTok creators like Addison Rae or Bella Poarch, right? Fighters like Conor McGregor or someone of that effect. They did put in all these steps, they put in the work, etc. But that pushing that boulder up did happen quicker. But whether it happened for somebody in 6 months, 6 years, or 26 years, when that boulder gets to the top, it's coming down full speed, and it's sort
Yeah.
of that tipping point, right? And like all of a sudden, all the work is going to pay off. And for some of that, for some of us, it takes a lot longer. For some of us,
Yeah.
it's a lot quicker. If you're head down, enjoying the moment and appreciating the actual pursuit and the journey, and that's all
Yeah.
that matters, anyways. But that's where the keep going comes into play, right? Is that if you start to over evaluate that something is or is not working, then that can be unhealthy. And the reason
Yeah.
why we're doing this is to enjoy life and to be mentally healthy as much as
That's
possible.
right.
The keep learning piece, to go into a little bit of specifics, is uh, I mentioned that a lot of these different steps come from other people's work, and Carol Dweck's book called Growth Mindset. I mean, there's no better piece of content than that to discuss this idea that doesn't matter how good you are at something. I'll often reference the example of Sidney Crosby in this case, what the best hockey player in the world. Yet, still today, Tom Brady, football player, to use more American sports references
Yeah.
for you, is still asking himself, how can I get better?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what specific parts of this game do I need to improve right now? And so
Yeah.
that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's true. Because if someone's at their peak, yet they're still looking to see how can they peak or get better, is just goes to show that always keep learning. But there's one thing that I want to probably more answer for the audience is there a time or a period in which you should just kind of see, is there a point that you should maybe cut losses and then make a change? Like how do you determine that? Because I know sometimes it can get a bit of a, I guess it's a bit of a both balance in terms of you're spending money, you're thinking, oh no, if I just keep it this dream, it's going to happen, believing in the dream rather than, the execution. And it probably comes back to a bit around that systems and, not adapting and, just sticking to the one thing. But how do you bring together of knowing, well, more focusing on the keep learning rather than the keep going? Because you need to learn in order to grow, to keep going to where you want to be. But sometimes people just get stuck on, I'm just going to keep doing this and expect things to just happen. How do you try and manage that?
I think about four things come to mind. But one is that we talked a little bit earlier about Tony Robbins. Actually, even though on his website, I think his catchphrase is, I help people. It's like, that's about as broad as it gets.
Yeah.
Yet that concept is as niche as it gets as well, because if you are enjoying it, if it's serving the purpose of making your life better, then you probably keep going. But again,
Yeah.
what is the need that
That's
you
true.
have as, I'll use the term client, if I was working with someone, what is their need? And are we fulfilling that? If we aren't, then we start to go backwards a little bit. And
Yep.
so the second
That's a
thing
good
that comes
answer.
to mind is the classic board game Chutes and Ladders, or Snakes and Ladders.
Yep.
The way that I look at this 9-step process of clarity and completion, and the 9 things it includes, is it's much like a board game like Snakes and Ladders, where at any one moment you could easily have to, not in a bad way,
Go back
but a
up.
way of reevaluating. Exactly. Go back. I should reverse these so that they're working their way up.
Yep.
Actually, I have one where it's the opposite for that reason, right? So you go, you slide back down in theory.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because how far are we sliding back down to reevaluate the
Yeah.
situation? Are we going all the way back to like, we need to start dreaming again because like we're just like, we hate music now and we're
Yeah.
done with it? Or is it like, as you mentioned, money, for example, right? Like you start to be like, I'm still not making any money and I've been
Yeah.
shelling out $500 a month for this business and it's 3 years in. Okay, well, maybe we go back to budget. We need to go back and get a part-time job, or
Yeah.
drive Uber because you can do some research while you're driving, or like whatever. It doesn't matter. But we just go back down that process and look at, well, where do we need to re-enter these steps? And the other thing too that we didn't talk too much on, but I think is important to at least point out before we wrap, is that before all of this,
Yep.
I always tell people that this comes third to making sure that you take care of your self-care first, including your spiritual, your mental, and your physical health. If you can do that, then you make sure you can take care of your relationships, friends, family. If you can do that, then we go start working on these 9 steps. And so it kind of goes back to the fact that if you are taking care of your self-care and your relationships, then
Yeah.
these 9 steps, not to get too philosophical, but they're not that big of a deal, whether it's work or hobby.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's a
life's
good
short.
point.
There's cliches. Like, it doesn't matter anyway. So scrap them all together because it's not serving you, and let's start again or re-enter somewhere else.
Yeah, because if you don't have, it's if those things aren't in order, well, then I can even see that people would be getting to step 5 and thinking, oh yeah, I'll just give up that, or I won't go to this game, or I won't spend that time with my loved ones, or I won't do my fitness, and I'll, just work on this, and you start to, compromise and things like that. So I think that that's a super important thing. It's kind of like that kind of funny joke where it's like, before you get a pet, you need to manage a house plant. Before you get to have a kid, can you even manage a pet? But in some sense, it's the same kind of idea. Is like, well, if you can't look after yourself, if you can't even look after your relationships, how are you going to be able to look after something like this? Because the potential of this can be quite big, right? And ideally it will be life changing, right? So there's a lot of responsibility in doing that. It's quite overwhelming when you look at it from that perspective, but the idea is that it's not to make it overwhelming. So if you've got those other things in play, then this somewhat isn't going to be that overwhelming in terms of, I guess, bringing this pressure or fighting or competing against yourself or loved ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing that I could really add that's important is that at some stage, it's important to add that idea of having a mentor. I think you brought it up maybe on stage 6 or 7, but I did reference in step 1 that having somebody who's a caring, supportive person is important to go through all these with. Each level to me is important. Having a hero, meaning it's the sort of like biggest person that you look up to in this space. You want to be an actor and you look up to Will Smith or Matthew McConaughey, right? And you maybe don't meet them or ever have them directly mentor you, but that's kind of like your North Star person that you appreciate and you look up to, thriving to be somewhat like, not because you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, but because that's your sort of inspiration, your motivation. And then having a mentor, so someone that can directly support you, whether it's a paid coach you're paying, $20K a year to work with, or it's somebody that you're paying $0 because they're a colleague at work who you've always respected their opinion and you're going to pick their brain once a week, having someone that's your equal. So maybe somebody else who's also starting a podcast, somebody else who's also just starting to Twitch a stream, and you're going to maybe compete with them in a healthy way, push each other but you're also going to collaborate and connect on ideas. But then this is one of the classic things that I see people get wrong too, because they wait so long to put themselves in a teaching position. And this is a very sneaky but valuable tip to this just keep learning mindset, is that you need to put yourself in a teaching position as soon as possible. And so becoming a mentor to somebody who is a step behind you takes like a week, right?
Yeah.
So and that's just to quickly mention that NFT project.
That's very true.
As of November, I guarantee people are going to be calling me and asking me a ton of questions about NFTs. That's fine. I'll let them pick my brain forever.
I'm already thinking.
Well, I've already done it. Like last week, a friend called and was like, I have no idea, but I seen your Twitter and I have a whole bunch of questions. Can I ask you about NFTs for an hour? And I said, yeah, sure.
Because you're the expert in the circle, and it's easier to talk to someone than to some big person that you might not get a response from. So it's like, well, it just makes sense, right? Because even this is so important, because, and it kind of comes back to that whole run analogy that I said before as well, right? People ask me, how do I start running? It's like, well, grab some shoes and just get out and running. And I said, or, if you're really serious about it, maybe go get your feet fitted so you're running on the right shoes. But otherwise, I would say just get out and run, right? If you have to walk, but don't try and set like, okay, you need to hit a certain pace at this, like that's not the intent, right? If you want to run, get out, go for a jog, see what happens, right? If you can't jog more than 100 meters, that's okay. See what you can do the next time. Did you get to 110, right? And I think that's what this whole thing does, is it breaks it down into simple terms to help us understand that these things are possible, right? And, you might be someone that's only on step 5 and they're just getting into that execution or getting into the stage where they're starting to complete this, right? They've still got, 5-6 steps to go. But for someone that's back, still trying to find their clarity, they're going to be an expert. oh, how did you make this look so easy? How did you, launch your business, or how are you, making progress, right? And you can say, oh, well, this is what I did. And really all they've done is just follow some steps and they've gone through it. It doesn't mean that they're perfect, doesn't mean that they're pro, but they're just potentially a little further on the timeline. And I totally agree with you, because usually it's those moments where you get uncomfortable that are the right things for you. And usually teaching someone else, and even if you feel like, oh, I'm not that good at it, that's a sign that, well, clearly you're inspiring or influencing, or you have something that's of value to someone else. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking.
Mhm. Yeah, the things that I am so far from an expert in that I feel confident teaching in right now. And that's a fine line too. And I would bring this up if I was at like an educational conference or, working with a group of soon to be educators, is to not teach things you don't know.
Yeah,
Like, I
that's
think
true.
there's an important distinction here, but like I've done a lot of supporting youth with hip hop. And so I've been in lots of courses that those kids have taken with actual hip hop artists and experts and spoken word poets. Through that, I've learned a lot about writing music. I feel very confident that if somebody is a true beginner, to be able to help them with music. Golf would be another one. I'm only a 10 handicap, would shoot in the 80s, but I know that I could really exponentially help someone who's just starting the game.
Yeah,
Right? They'll get to the point where they need another coach.
yeah,
But there's these certain things that I'm not messing them up by doing that teaching. And again, it's more in this case to serve my purpose, right? To serve
yeah,
your own learning purpose. You have to be putting yourself in positions to teach right away, ideally, because you're going to have that become more ingrained, more intrinsic for yourself. But you're also going to be like, oh shit, when you asked that about NFTs, I didn't know the answer. And
yeah.
so that happens in a very authentic way. And that's the only way to know. I don't know
Yeah.
what I don't know about NFTs right now until
100%.
asking
And
me
it's
questions.
better being upfront about that than trying to say, oh yeah, well, and trying to come up with something, because I think
Yeah.
if anything, that gives a bit more authenticity, and the person's going to trust you more. And there's plenty of educators, people in high places, that they don't have those answers, and they say, oh, we'll have to come back to you, right? Doesn't mean you can't find the answer, just means you don't know the answer at this point. So it's just like, dude, this has been really, really, I mean, great for me. I've loved this so much. There's so many things here which I think I can go and apply, and just, go back and check in on, just for the things that I'm executing on. But I think this episode, I mean, this whole conversation, for people to listening, I hope they realize how powerful this is if actually people just go through, take the time to, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, right? And I think having that other person to play back these ideas will make it a lot easier. It's been super great to have you here. But one thing I just want to quickly clarify. So if someone had questions about this, can they reach out to you? Can they have a conversation with you, about going to make this happen? Because it can still be quite scary to actually execute on this. I feel like that's probably the hardest part, is actually taking the initiative or the steps to actually say, I want to do something, and stepping in and committing to something like this. So can they reach out to you and have a chat, or what's the go there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that I borrowed from the sports world and my experience is that I have an open door policy. I hope to forever have one. Sometimes things get busy when it comes to DMs or these kinds of things, but the short answer is always. I use the handle just tries on every app that I have, to keep things simple so people
It's
can
good.
reach out anytime. And I have a lot of empathy for that whole trying to be sold to online. This was a neat thing to learn in the world of online business, because I think a
Yeah,
lot of people are scared to reach out to people because they think, oh, they're just going to try and sell me a course or sell me
very true.
coaching or sell me a book or whatever. And I have a lot of empathy for meeting those types of people, even purchasing courses from those types of people, or getting DMs from their
Yeah.
VAs when I know it's not even them, and I'm like, take a hike. It's like I've been through all of that, but I also have the empathy of saying that I don't have anything to invest in my coaching, to
Yeah.
going to, like, I paid someone like $1,000 over the course of like 4 months, to then leveling up that too, to where right now I'm looking at kind of like what could be my next level for going out and seeking support too,
Yeah.
'cause it's getting at a higher level. So I have
Yeah.
that whole empathy too. But I think I hope to compete with anyone in the world on the idea of just supporting people just for being just to try and help, and that's it.
That's it. And I can totally vouch for that, because I remember when we first met, and it was via Clubhouse conversation, and you kind of reach out afterwards, and, we had never met, and you said, oh, love what you're doing, loved your story. And it was a bit overwhelming. I was kind of like, oh, wow, okay, what does this guy want? And then,
Yeah.
you said, happy to be on the podcast and all this. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, this guy's like really, but it was 100% genuine. And, then I got to know you and whatnot. And I can't thank you enough, right? I mean, here you are for episode number 2 with you. But that's just it, right? So people, Justin is genuine. It's 100%. He's here to help. And that's what I love about you so much, man, is that you are wanting to just have a good conversation, bounce some ideas and help people. And I think we need more of that in this world. Maybe you're going to get bombarded, maybe you won't with messages, but at the end of the day, I appreciate, you taking the time to share this, because a lot of the time, and I can speak for this, it can be overwhelming. You're trying to achieve all these things. You want to be in all these places. And it can get quite overwhelming, and there's so many different things happening. And if I'm experiencing that and I'm already during this process, I think it's important for people that are potentially thinking, dreaming, still in those early days of wondering and thinking of, well, if only I could do this, or how do I even start that? Well, this is the 9-step process in helping you achieve those big dreams. And Justin, mate, I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I will mention one last thing, not to extend the conversation, because it's just so on point for what you just said. Rich Litvin wrote the book, The Prosperous Coach. And I love his mindset, his whole mentality around the idea of supporting people. And there are 2 non-negotiables that he has when he has built his $1 million coaching practice. And one of them is that he's never worked with anyone without coaching them for free for at least a few hours. So I think that's really interesting. And 2, he's never direct marketed his coaching services. He's only ever worked with someone through referral or by somebody coming to him for a valuable, life-changing coaching experience, and then seeing where it goes from there, and not worrying about his own results, right? And I think even after having worked with people like that for hours, they still think you're not genuine sometimes, because we all have our defense mechanisms up sometimes, myself included. But it's just been fun to see anybody's progress, big or small.
That's it. No, dude, thank you so much. And folks, you've heard it all here. Utilize this, take advantage of it, right? It's a step process, which, it doesn't have all the details behind it, but it's enough there to give you somewhat of a guidance to a North Star. And then you can always reach out to Justin and have a conversation. Heck, you can reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to try and help and navigate and answer any questions, which is relevant, because, hey, I'm going through it too. And that's what it's all about, is helping each other and teaching each other. So Justin, really do appreciate it. We've got all your details. I appreciate you coming back for a second time. I can't thank you enough, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Till next time.
Cheers. Well, there you go. That is the end of the 9-step process on how to live your big dream. And I can't thank Justin enough of coming on to this podcast and taking the time to share this with us, because these are important steps that I think sometimes we probably all take that we don't realize we're taking, but sometimes we need the encouragement, we need the guidance in order for us to actually get to where we want to be. And whether it is you just need help with step 1 to 4, maybe you need help with steps 5 to 9, and with actually taking action and making things happen. Well, it's all here. You've heard it all, but I do want to encourage you, if you've got more questions, maybe it was a bit too much, or maybe you're not too sure on something, reach out to Justin. You can hit him up on Instagram at JustTries. He's on LinkedIn. He's on all the great places. And but mainly on Instagram and LinkedIn is where you'll be able to contact him quickly and get that response. He's more than happy to have that conversation with you. So I've learned a lot from this. There's so much here that I think I can take away and, go back and actually apply it to some of the things that I've been building out here on the podcast with my other side hustles, because sometimes hearing it from a fresh perspective, hearing it from someone else, keeping you honest is what is going to enable you to take that action or enable you to grow or make a pivot and adjustment that is going to enable you to get that growth. So I really do appreciate you being here, Justin, and I appreciate you guys listening and tuning in. It's been an absolute honor to have this conversation, and you have a wonderful day. Now, if you didn't know, we do have the podcast merch, and this is with a key focus of enamel pins. Now, if you haven't checked these out, make sure you do. because the intent of these are really just to be a small token and a reminder for you to charge on, to push on, and to further your lifestyle. Whether it is a gift for someone else to encourage them or maybe to inspire them, or maybe it's a way to motivate yourself, or you can simply just make a purchase to simply support the podcast, which would be greatly appreciated. We do also have some sweaters and some long tees, so make sure you check it out. Link in the description and in the show notes. Really do appreciate it. Cheers.